Do you struggle with guilt? Do you fear you don't spend enough time with your family? You don't put in enough effort at work? Well, this week we are so fortunate to be able to speak with Amy P. Kelly about how we can make some simple shifts in our mindset to be able to get more done and improve our daily outlook. I am so excited to welcome Amy Kelly here today. She is a global human resource and talent development executive known for building exceptional cultures, including award-winning employment brands and leadership development programs. Amy, welcome to Revel Coaches. It's Better Together.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So tell me, well, okay, I'm going to let Marcy start.
Well, thank you, Amy. It's so great to see you again. We are so excited. And I personally was excited for this conversation because I love the work that you do around, developing cultures and communication with employees. But before we begin some conversation, some questions I have around that, I hear you're coming out with a book. Is that right?
Yes, I am excited. My book there isn't an official launch date yet, but it's coming out either at the end of this year or early January, and it's called Glue, a leadership development strategy to bond and unite.
Oh, creative. That's awesome. So tell us about the journey. So how long have you been writing the book? And
well, the journey was really cool, Marcy. I was doing an event out of town. I live in Virginia and I was in Florida. And I was thinking about something that I had just witnessed between two business professionals that it was a little bit it jarred me the way that they communicated. And I started thinking about all of the interactions that I'd seen over the years and some that were my own interactions. And it led me to write this story, this parable in about 48 hours. I wrote the whole thing and I've been working on it. Yes, I've been working on it for a little over a year, kind of adding to it, refining it. And so now it's going to come out.
I love it when the best things happen in a very quick amount of time because it means passion is involved. We can focus. We actually it's like it's an input and all we can do is just put our words onto paper, into the computer. I guess we don't really do paper so much anymore, but I'm really excited to be able to read this. And communication is so important in every aspect of our lives. I mean, from family to work to friendships. And so being able to really come up with a structure, a framework for how to develop a good communication strategy sounds like something the world needs.
Well, there's no doubt. We were talking about this as we prepared, and a lot of the things about communication as it relates to relationships that then each relationship becomes, if it's a group, it's a team, then there are multiple relationships, teams, and organizations. So all that communication impacts everybody that you're interacting with. And when there's not communication, it tends to cause challenges and people start to do things like make up their own stories, right? So if you don't have your communication plans in place and consistently doing that, it can put stress and pressure on relationships and the results that we're looking for inside, whether it is a family relationship that we treasure and we want to stay positive, or whether it's a work relationship that we're confused by or doesn't seem to be working, it tends to go back to the aspects of how you're communicating.
And I'd love to learn from you. So a lot of times when people start talking about, we need to have better communication, it starts with a deficit, like something's probably wrong. And that's why now they're realizing they need to communicate. Starting at that point, what are some common themes you hear of mistakes that people do? And then, how we can kind of overcome those mistakes?
Well, I think one of the things that I see come up a lot is congruence. And what I mean is saying that certain things are important, and not that a lot of times people aren't even being inauthentic, saying that they care about communicating, saying that they care about certain ways to stay in touch, and then not doing those. And while it's important to give grace to people, we can't always hold to every single thing. But if you say something is important and it's a part of the way you communicate with people, and then you consistently don't do that thing that you said was important, people lose their belief, which impacts their attitude and their motivations and engagement and productivity. And you see me going down the list of the things that matter about personal relationships as well as organizational outcomes. So I think I know that a big focus is congruence. Are the actions that you're taking congruent with what you said were the priorities of establishing successful one-on-one, team, and organizational communications? And what I find is a lot of times, and this has happened to me so many times, that's why I was interested in it, is why doesn't this person know how much I care about them? And well, I would look and thought, well, the last time we sat down and spoke one-on-one was over 6 months ago. And it didn't negate the reality that I did care about them, but when your communication does not actually show that congruence to what you stated, then the belief is impacted, and that ultimately needs to be reconnected.
Yeah, like, and what's interesting about that is like I constantly go to like my time management approach of if it's on my calendar, it'll get done. But there's something inauthentic if you do like a regularly scheduled meeting with somebody. So like to not speak with somebody for 6 months is just as bad as like forcing the conversation on a schedule, you know, like a certain schedule. Is there some sort of balance, or what do you find the right, have the right balance?
Well, I think that some of the definitions of communication, even with my personal relationships, that my family laughs, but I look at it this way. There's kind of team and relationship building communication. And of course, all communication impacts these things in some way, but there's when you're really focusing on the relationship, then when you're focusing on kind of team or organizational development, like you're growing things, you're building skill sets. And then there's the execution and strategy type. What are we going to do next? What's our plan? What's our vision? And you can have all of those things personally and professionally. And when people have regularly scheduled one-on-ones, a lot of times they take on the tone of one, maybe two of those things, but not all three. So you can become one-dimensional in your communication that won't feel as authentic. It won't feel as inspiring. And so even though I'm a fan of making sure you have a regular one-on-one, because that it becomes more of an operational requirement to execute successfully, the leader and needs to partner, and the other person needs to partner so that there is space allocated to those other types of, the building of the relationship, the building of the skill set, and then the how are we partnering to do the things and continue to keep the strategy and the vision and the mission alive. So when the one-on-ones hit the one-dimensional note, you start to see that they become default and rote, and they don't have the same depth.
Do you have questions that people can start with, like ask? For example, if you have a one-on-one, there's usually a power structure, right? So one person is higher power than the other person. Is there a way that I've heard where not the higher power, but the other one starts the conversation and comes with questions that they can ask to a little bit more of a level playing field?
Well, I think one amazing thing about one-on-ones is that you've got to keep them fresh. Like when I'm the manager, I might have an agenda that I use for maybe 2 months, and then I'm changing it up so that they know it's going to be different. And I'm also coming with one question, at least every other time, that's just about them. And then I might ask them to come with a question for me. We think about this, I think about it as we're artists, and we're business artists that we're responsible, and it's fun because if you have the same agenda for 5 years, you definitely are going to have a different type of communication than if you are asking questions, if you plan activities, if you ask them to change the location. You've got to be just as engaged and have a strategy for how to keep things fresh in your communication as any other. So you're still team building, you're team developing with the partnership, and then you're also executing and strategizing. So And we're constantly, I'm always looking for what are some things that I can introduce to keep things fresh for the person I'm meeting with, assessments, video assets, micro learning opportunities, and then asking them, what do you want to hear about? What would you like to learn about? And making sure that it's never it never takes on the tone to the best of a power structure. It takes on the nature of that conversation and that partnership. And, you know, the questions really come from, I mean, I see some of my business associates and friends on this session, and there are resources, you know, look for powerful questions. I'm always looking to learn. That's why we're here and communicating in this forum, as well as so many of the other forums that you've created for women and other business leaders, learning new ways to do that. It's a never ending, exciting opportunity. It is not static. You're always looking for things to fuel those conversations with vibrancy. And also remembering that, I always try to remember the things that I like. I've found that over the years, not everyone likes to do the things that I like to do. So stopping, and every so often as I develop others or work to be the best support in developing them as possible, say, okay, you have a couple weeks, you're going to plan for the next 2 sessions. I'm not involved. So it's really keeping a consistency of the communication, but an excitement and an unexpected rhythm, so that you never hit the same note too often.
Amy, your enthusiasm is so contagious. It's awesome. I love it. So I love the visual of being like an artist of business, because a lot of times people don't recognize the creativity that's involved in being a good leader, a good coach, or something like that. So I'd actually like to run a scenario by you and then get your feedback. So about this time of the year, I have clients who they do the employee feedback surveys, and they're collecting them either for the performance review or just the year-end planning for next year and prioritization. And a common trap that people get into is assumptions of what somebody's saying. You know, like the example you said, like, I don't think you care enough about me. And their experience is that, because you haven't talked to them in 6 months, but your experience, like, how do they not know? Like, I send thank you notes, I'm always complimenting them. But like, what types of, for executives that are receiving the confidential reports, and whether they're anonymous or not, people kind of always know who they are. What advice do you have for truly listening and then showing that you're listening in employee feedback surveys?
Yep. Just like the artistry we were already discussing, you know, we as leaders are, I believe, and have seen that we're always working to get better at hearing that input about ourselves and others. We have to be working on it, because I actually had, before I answer this question, I just hope that everyone else will find it funny too. I had finished a series over 18 months about feedback and put a lot of work, this was about 7 years ago, into delivery. It was successful. We all learned a lot. I knew it. And someone in my company who I very high up and highly regarded, we were in a meeting, and he said to me, he said, you know what's funny? And I was like waiting, because he's a funny person. And I said, what's funny? And he said, it's funny that you did that great series on feedback and you're just not that good at getting it. And I said, you know, because I wanted everyone to think highly of me. I wanted to always produce something excellent. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that I think that we have to prep ourselves with some mindset work before we look at that feedback. And remind, I've worked with executives who have heard that message over and over and over again. And then because they received something that they weren't expecting, or hit really close to where maybe they thought they were working hard and it wasn't coming across the way they intended, inadvertently responded in a way that, guess what? The anonymous person that we knew who they were then knew that the other person knew because of the way they acted. And it just all gave that whole process a bad name. So one of the things that I highly recommend is that we never have just one source of input. I have partnerships with a lot of engagement companies that I highly respect, and I love the different indices that different companies offer to measure. And doing executive education and manager education prior to the process, as well as the, you know, right before everyone receives all the information, hugely important. And it has to be done in micro learning sessions, because you know how hard it is to get everyone in a room. But that is a big deal. And then remembering that most of the bonds that truly become stronger is because someone was courageous enough, because people are scared to give that input. They're nervous that, like, are they going to know it was me? Sure, 5 people are in a group. You know, sometimes they'll say it's 5 people that are a minimum to give a leader their feedback so that everyone's anonymity is protected. It's amazing how super sleuthy everyone becomes when they're looking at information about themselves. So I've seen people figure out, or think they figured out who was who. but making sure that leaders know that really, if you extrapolate down your career, when you can turn that feedback into an even stronger employee relationship, that is the massive opportunity, because they told you, they had the courage to tell you. And then when you can truly, with a heart for them and not what it means just to you, make some adjustments, I've seen that really change the nature of people's working relationships and entire teams. So preparing for those is very important. I love that you brought it up, because there are almost seasons when it happens, and people, wouldn't you love to be an employee and get your anonymous survey 2 weeks before you had your one performance evaluation that's attached to your compensation? It's very tricky to get good feedback, and the leaders at in all the different levels, but definitely at the top, need to be saying, remember how important this is. Remember why we're investing in this, and make sure that you use it to become stronger and build your relationship stronger. And it takes consistent reminders, because when the feedback is really good and it might hit a soft spot, no matter how seasoned people are, it can be challenging.
Absolutely. I mean, I love how you're saying it. And I think it does come back to hearing, listening, like truly reading, not to interpret and understand, like, I mean, yes, you're going to do that because there's natural instinct to figure out the who, but as long as you're trying to figure out the who from a positive place, like, okay, here's an opportunity to lead more, or get more feedback, or like understand more. I think that's kind of what I'm hearing you say, is that it's that next level. Do you call it heart meetings? What are you saying?
So earlier I said that at the end of the book, I've always had, I've never been a fan of the terminology hard conversation. And I've also not been a fan of, you've got to go and confront that person, because we've got to confront the issue. And obviously it's related to my beliefs, but I've always thought, in order to actually communicate, you just need to have conversations. You need to have them about your culture, etc. And I was saying at the end of the book that I wrote, that the two business women that work toward kind of rebonding and reconciling their business partnership, instead of calling it a hard conversation, they call it a heart conversation. And that is actually something that one of the other community members that's here today, we both fell in love with that terminology. And I've since come to find out that, like, we thought we invented it, and I thought Petra Krebs, who's on the call, invented it. I've looked around and other people have used that terminology, but the idea in my mind, just to share, is that when you prepare your heart and you prepare to think about the other person in that way, it's a very different preparation process, regardless of what you might think about a heart conversation, or if that immediately resonates with you. Think about how you would prepare if you were preparing for a hard conversation where you're strapping on like your roller coaster, harness, or a confrontation, or a heart conversation where you want to understand and get back to actually believing the best in the other person, and kind of reconnecting with why you worked together in the first place, or had the relationship in the first place. So it's a posture, I think, and the posture that we take in our minds and in our hearts and in our spirit before we have a conversation where things don't seem to be working from a communication perspective is very important. Because when we react, or when we're hurt, or, I've even heard people say hungry, angry, lonely, tired, whatever it is, we respond, and our behaviors reflect that space, and our behaviors and our words reflect the space of the heart. And that is a much more fertile ground for reconciliation and for successful outcomes. And that's true in the workplace too. I may not have used that particular terminology, but the way you go to have one-on-one communication and how you prepare for that, just like preparing for the feedback that you were talking about inside those surveys, that preparation, that mindset, and I believe heart and kind of spiritual grounding is going to affect what comes next out of your mouth and the behaviors that follow. And then people respond accordingly.
So we've talked a lot about putting on our own armor and heart-centered conversations. A lot of times I find that it's my anticipation of what the other person's reaction will be that causes me to behave in a certain way. So how would you discuss dealing with that?
Well, with the coaching that I do, the first thing that I'm really looking to understand is the individual at peace with their identity. And peace a lot of times is related to what your question was. And so am I at peace before I go to have this conversation? And maybe that means different things to different people, but am I thinking only about how this impacts me? Am I fearful of making a mistake or looking bad? Am I thinking through a lens where it could be aligned with defensiveness or insecurity? And I mean, I certainly have done that. And my behavior in a conversation when I felt, I'm justified because I feel this way. And that slowing down and really understanding, where am I at peace and am I secure in kind of my identity and who I am in this? And then that allows me to do what I'm intending, which is focus my energies on what might be the challenge for the other individual instead of worrying about how it might impact me. So there are ways, I have mental checklists that I go through. I've certainly made a ton of mistakes in this area that I've learned from that have allowed me to prepare differently. And just looking at when you have peace in your own identity and where you play a role in kind of the world and your leadership journey, your life leadership journey, then you're able to go out and actually serve and be a support and value to other people more successfully, especially those conversations, especially where there's a lack of communication that needs to be addressed. And, the second piece is really just looking at presence and kind of your presence and patience in the process. So be present with that person. Don't create the whole story in advance, like you were just saying. You hear people speak about this all the time. You can either have faith or you can have fear. Faith is like expecting something good, possibly. You're not depending on it, but you're looking at the possible good outcome. Or you can create this whole laundry list of all the horrible ways it could go. So set those aside and just be present and listen and be at peace with your own part of it and really focus on helping them. And then you can be patient. That presence allows you to be patient with others and patient with yourself, because regardless of how you prepare, regardless of how much you listen, it doesn't guarantee that you'll successfully reach a positive resolution on that first communication outcome. And we have to be okay with that, because the more we're okay with that, the more we'll be able to come back and have that second conversation and get it closer to a healing or a resolution or a successful outcome. So starting with peace in your identity, not telling all those stories, and then being present and really being patient in the process are keys.
Okay, so there were so many nuggets of information we can go into. This is so awesome. But the one thing I was thinking of is like as a mom communicating with kids. And I think this is like a great example because it's basically your blueprint of how to communicate. But by like the story that I was thinking of is a lot of times with my kids, all kids, like teenagers, they have so many things that are going on in their world that we have no idea and we'll never know unless we don't create an open heart that you can have that type of communication with them. So often, like when I have like major disappointment or annoyance, like with a kid, so say like a crazy messy room and then not proper manners to me, like downstairs. So I'll go into like the scenario, knowing the room's trashed, knowing the things I really expect for them in terms of like their responsibilities at home are not being met, but the way they're behaving downstairs was like not them. So I would often like stand outside the room, almost prepare myself by saying like they are, like who they stand for, what they are like, and I would kind of like mentally prepare and step in their shoes a little bit more in terms of like that act of love. And so then when I'd be totally patient in the room, like the show of the display of clothes that entails this is hypothetical. But, I could go. And so when my daughter would ask me like, well, how did you overcome that? I'm like, or if I were saying things, like, I know who you are, that's not you. What else is happening? And she would ask a question of like, how to do that. I'm like, well, I know your heart and who you are is not who you're behaving. And that's just growing, that's just, you're reacting to certain things. So I need to understand like what's going on in your heart, but like your heart conversation so much reminded me of like how moms can bypass everything with total confidence and peace and be like, I think this child needs love. And out of all the balls that are getting thrown at children all day long, it's the one place we need to always be like flourishing that. So when you said, peace in your identity, like getting really grounded there, that's so important. And then being present and then patient, because the patient one is like, what I love the most, especially in business, is if you're too busy, you're trying to check it off the list. And then you're seeing the clock like, oh, we only have 6 minutes left. I got to make sure they hear me. Versus patient is like, okay, this is the first conversation, might be building trust. And then you're earning the right to communicate again. So anyway, I just found this so profound. I need to share that story.
Well, I love what you're saying, because really the deepest passions of my heart are to believe in other people and help them in some way in the leader they were created to be, and play a role in that. So what you're talking about with children, I have another friend, Petra's one, she's on this call, and, we are all pursuing, you notice the P's, okay? The letter P is very important to me. And I show my middle initial often, and I use that as part of my brand because it is my grandmother's name, but it also is inside my name. And it stands for the power is on the inside of each person to fulfill their purpose. And so one of my other friends was saying, I speak to the leader, not the loser. And I don't really use the word loser a lot in my life, but I liked that because what I'm doing with my children many times, when I come home from a trip, Marcy, I always am in the garage going, I know what the laundry room is going to look like. I know what the second floor landing is going to look like. I know what this room is going to look like. And it used to just make me crazy that they never did anything different. But I was like, no, I need to do something different. I set my mind, I walk in and I'm like, what happened? And I'm always looking to believe in them and help them be the leader they were created to be. So it goes back to that purpose and identity. And sure, believe me, my oldest son, at one point, he drew a picture of this monster with multiple heads, and he called it the Screamosaurus, and he said it was me. And this was because there was a time when I was like, okay, all 4 of you, this is not working. And I would just yell out you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to stop doing this. And if people didn't do it, I just yelled louder and was trying to get people to listen. And I'm not proud of that, but it's gone from, okay, demanding things from people to doing what I just said, understanding my own identity as a mom and as the leader of my life and a wife and a professional. And how do I walk in that identity with, presence and patience, is to be with them and to not constantly think about, because when I went to the root of it, it was me feeling like a failure that I couldn't get them to do what I thought they needed to do. Not because it was some crazy task, like do 50 backflips because I really need to know that I have power over you. It was, could you please just let this clutter not be the way, because it would be so much more the way I wanted it to be. So while it's still important for them to pick up and to understand that, it wasn't to me, and I think you're saying the same thing too, it isn't as important to helping them understand how to communicate. And by doing communication the wrong way, you just create chaos in your household, you create chaos in your relationships and your organization. So it does go back to that. And how do you establish the right structure? You're always looking at it, because one structure may work and then you have to adjust it after a certain amount of time. Because if you do the same thing for too long, people tend to start to they become numb to it. Even with engagement surveys, if you use the same one for too long, if you use the same one-on-one format. And so we get to be that artist and continually infusing our relationships with support for their identity and their leadership.
Oh, I love it. Well, I am wishing we had more time for the recorded session, but for those of you that are with us, we will welcome you to the backstage to join us for more conversations. And so overall, Amy, can I ask you, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you or learn more about your book, what's the best approach to connect with you?
Amy P. Kelly at amypkelly.com is my email address, and my website is amypkelly.com, and there's also a way to get in touch with me there. And I am so excited because Allison and you have asked me to send just a short kind of little, here's this exciting thing that's happening about my book, and I will definitely do that too. So look at the blog, because there'll be other women sharing their expertise and their insights. And that's really why I was so excited to be here, because multiple women that I would absolutely go to for advice and respect said, think about this community. You have to hear about it. And now getting to interact with it, I'm going to be at the blog myself looking for other things, and check out my notification. That'll be there soon too.
Awesome. Well, we are so honored that you're here, and thank you for everybody that referred us to you. And this has been an awesome conversation. So another episode of It's Better Together with Revel Coach.
Bye, everybody.